Welcome, everyone. I'm Sandra Bargman. A few years ago, I wrote and performed a solo show called The Edge of Every Day, which was an exploration of the rough edges and contradictions we all face and grapple with. The show hit a nerve, and the relevance of the topic would only grow over time more than I could have foreseen. So, here we are. Real talk with real people, sharing stories and perspectives that spark provocative invitations to leap out of what's safe, on the edge of every day. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. We are live in the Hive. Thank you for joining me on this, the 19th episode of The Edge of Every Day here on TalkRadio.NYC. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, and for those of you who don't know me yet, I encourage you to check out my bio on TalkRadio.NYC, or of course you can visit my website, sandrabargman.com, or tune in to any of my previous episodes. In a nutshell, this show is about celebrating triumphs, pushing boundaries, and exploring rough edges. Through conversations and shared stories with friends and colleagues, it's my hope that we can begin to understand our edges. And what I mean by edges is those places where we are fearful, those places where we are resistant to change, those places where paradoxes and contradictions live in our beliefs and our understandings, both about ourselves and the world around us. Those places we don't want to look. Listen, we live in turbulent times, and we are coming to understand that life isn't black or white. It must be an embrace of both. And the more we recognize our own edges and get real about them, the more we can help others to do the same. And that, I fully believe, can help to change the world. So thanks again for tuning in. And without further ado, it's time to introduce our guest this evening. Dr. Sharon Leder is Professor Emerita of English, Women's Studies, and Jewish Studies at SUNY-Nassau Community College. She is the author of the novel The Fix, A Father's Secrets, A Daughter's Search, which won the Silver Winner Benjamin Franklin IBPA Award Best New Voice in Fiction in 2018. She is co-editor with Milton Teichman of Truth and Lamentation, Stories and Poems on the Holocaust, nominated for the National Jewish Book Award in 1994. In addition, she is a contributing editor and author in numerous journals of academic studies, as well as in TIKKUN, Lillith, and Opal Writers magazine. In her most recent book, 3 Groundbreaking Jewish Feminists Pursuing Social Justice, Dr. Leder profiles the lives of historian Gerda Lerner, artist Susana Wald, and global ambassador Ruth W. Messenger, secular Jews who came to see the purpose of Jewish life to be alleviating inequality and the suffering of all people. Judaism's social justice message captured Dr. Leder as a teenager and young adult growing up in the midst of the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and the second wave women's movement. A reminder, this month is Women's History Month. The theme of Women's History Month this year is providing healing, promoting hope. And I've chosen 4 women for my 4 Monday night conversations on the edge of every day this month that do just that. Provide healing and promote hope. 4 women committed to the upliftment and advancement of other women. And I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Sharon Leder. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Sandra. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I am overjoyed to have you here. I've been so looking forward to this. For our listeners, I met Sharon through the same networking group that last week's guest is a part of, Adele Anderson. It's our Reset networking group. And Sharon had posted within the group that she was creating a workshop that sounded fascinating to me. And I was really intrigued just simply from the title of your workshop, Sharon. It was called Awe, Freedom, and Responsibility, the Best I Can Be. And underneath it, she wrote, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am not for others, who am I? If not now, when? From Rabbi Hillel. And she also included, where do I stand as a Jew, as a person of faith, or one with a moral compass in this time of global ferment and change? How can I do my part without feeling powerless and overwhelmed? And you had me. So we had a conversation and we connected on this.
Yeah, I appreciated so much your response to the workshop title. The workshop was built around messages that I hoped my new book about the groundbreaking Jewish feminists would engage other people on. A conversation that has to do with how do we not feel isolated and overwhelmed in, as you say, these turbulent times. And Rabbi Hillel was writing in the first century before the Common Era, as well as extending into the first century of the Common Era.
Yeah.
And he became an actual contemporary of Jesus, so that his message really resounds throughout the centuries. And
Indeed.
we have to ground ourselves in these turbulent times. I was very concerned with how mythic and biblical the turbulent times are today. We have something analogous to what we experienced during Moses' time of the 10 plagues. We have a health pandemic globally. We have mass migrations of millions of people seeking asylum in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
We have a climate crisis. We have so many layers of warning signs
Yeah.
to alert us to the problems that we face. And at the same time, people can tend to respond with a feeling of despair, a feeling of isolation,
Absolutely.
a feeling that there's very little that I can do as an individual. And certainly in our culture, where individualism is so primary, where we each have our cell phones and our computers.
Yeah.
We're
And
not, yes, go ahead.
And I would say that it's really exacerbated with COVID. I mean, people feel as though the rug has been pulled out, and that, when is this going to end? And now with another strain happening, I believe, the isolation has really contributed to this sense of individualism that you just referenced.
Yeah, not to mention the rise in suicides and the rise of those addicted to opioids. So there is a tendency for what Rabbi Michael Lerner calls an extinction sickness to
An extinction sickness.
Yeah, there's a sense, the animals have it already, a sense that the end is coming. And so I thought it was necessary to create a workshop that revived some of the senses that others have had in the past that allowed them to persist in times of trauma. And the things that we could remember are encapsulated in these words of awe, freedom, and responsibility. We need to remember the miracle of life itself. We have it. And we need to reconnect with others and the natural world in order to understand what our place is in the universe. We didn't create ourselves. We are part of a creative, transformative power in the universe,
Yes.
which, if we have faith and we have hope, we can see as benign. It created us and it can sustain us.
Yeah, truly, honestly, you don't have to, you don't have to. This is this is not all a Jewish understanding. Certainly, this is not only an interfaith understanding, which is, of course, how I came and was attracted to it. It is, as you said, a secular understanding as well, that we are part of something greater, and even you don't have to even have awe for an all-encompassing overarching understanding of spirit like you and I may have to plug into this wisdom. And so that is my next question. Is it important to identify oneself as Jewish, according with the work of this workshop, to engage in TIKKUN Olam, the repair of the world?
Yeah.
Elaborate on that, obviously.
Yeah. Well, what you described, the repair of the world, TIKKUN Olam, is one of the values that I have taken from the Jewish tradition that I call universal values. One doesn't have to be Jewish. In fact, these universal values beautifully are within all faith traditions.
Indeed,
they are in all ethical systems, which is why they're so tried and true, because they're universal. And my goal in the workshop and in the book is to say, let's give prominence to these universal values.
I'm going to interrupt you there because you're bringing in the book, and this is great. We're going to get to the book in a little bit of time, but absolutely reference it. This is Sable Harris Gresh is checking in and says, "Good evening." Hello, Sable Harris Gresh. And Adele Anderson says hello. I love it. Hello, thanks for listening. And I also, I'm going to stop and not ask that next question because I've received, it's time for a break. So we're going to hold that thought. When we come back from our break, we're going to be back with Dr. Sharon Leder. We're going to talk about, we're going to save information on her book till we get to it a little later. We're going to come back and speak with her about a different book, one that I want to touch on that deals with her early life, and I believe really sets a great tone for the work that she has done her entire career. So when we come back with Dr. Sharon Leder on the Edge of Every Day, stay tuned.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Chipping around, kick my brain to the ground. These are the days it never rained, but it pours on the edge of
of every day. And we are back with Dr. Sharon Leder. So, before we dive into your book, I did want to mention, and we didn't get to it in our last session, that you were a teacher for the first half of your career. Before, you had always wanted to be a writer, and you became, in addition, you also became a teacher, and you were in the fledgling field of study, women's studies, which I loved. Those were your words, the fledgling field of study. I love the alliteration of that too. And that you were one of the early teachers who ushered in this whole field of study. And that leads beautifully into your book, your first book. So you had been, and you can weave this into your storytelling after I ask the question, you had been a teacher and had written academic writing, and then you made the decision to move into creative writing with your first novel, The Fix, Father's Secrets, A Daughter's Search. But this first started out as a memoir, telling your childhood story of being the oldest of 3 siblings with a father who had a secret. Tell us that story, and you can weave in your teaching as you see fit.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing in this past herstory, shall I call it.
I love that.
It was my attempt to understand something that I felt was holding me back during my teaching career. On the back burner, there were certain doubts I had about myself, certain insecurities that resulted from living in a childhood with a great deal of trauma.
Yeah.
My father was suffering from an over 30-year sickness, which we know of as addiction. But he was not fortunate enough to live in enlightened times like today, which calls addiction to heroin substance use disorder. We didn't have brain science at that time.
Yeah.
So in my community, which was a secular Jewish community, not observant, but secular, we still had certain folk sayings. One was, shikar is to goy. That is, Jewish people are not addicts. Jewish people are not alcoholics. They have no problems like that. Those are the problems of other people.
Right.
And so the secret that had to be kept, and that I kept being a dutiful daughter, was that my father suffered from this illness, which was heroin addiction.
Right.
And at the time when he got hooked, which was the late 1930s, right before the outbreak of World War II, his illness was really viewed as a moral failing, as a lack of will, a weak willpower, and eventually in the 50s and 60s, it was criminalized.
Yes.
And we know that people who, as my father, if they had marks on their arms, they'd be arrested and oftentimes imprisoned.
So,
Yes.
if I may interrupt, so your mother, when did she find out about this, and when did she tell you? When did she share this with you?
Well, she inadvertently shared it with me when I was 8 years old because she answered a telephone call, which was from the wife of a partner of my father's, who was also an addict, and they had both been apprehended.
And your mother did not know up until then?
She did not know about my father's addiction after the war. She thought he had given up what was called stuff before the war.
Okay.
And it was a condition of their getting married that he had become clean. And she thought that was the case. And so he kept his own secret too from the family. And I overheard this conversation. She knew I overheard it. And from then on, I became her confidant. And my father became, when he needed his fix, like a monster to me, someone who was really unrecognizable in terms of his need. He wasn't the person I knew as my dad. And at times like this, my mother would be frightened, my siblings would be frightened, I would be frightened. And in order to adjust to this situation, I thought of myself as having two fathers. And a kind and gentle man who I knew, and then a kind of monster.
Yes.
But
So
yes.
let me interrupt because I'm hearing feedback and I just put my my headset in. I hope that's helping a little bit. So fast forward, you have decided you've carried this trauma and you've realized that it's time to address it. So you move into writing a memoir. How did this memoir turn into a novel?
I realized after I had left full-time teaching, paid work, and wanted to devote myself to writing, that the memoir was serving a certain type of therapeutic function to trace my life steps and understand what was holding me back on an emotional level.
Yes.
But all around me, an opioid crisis was flooding the news. And I felt that I needed to finish this work soon because I felt my story could be helpful to other people. I was living in an area that was seen as a center of opioid addiction.
And where was this?
This was in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which might be known as a lovely place, but when it's not during the tourist season, it's like a wasteland for young people because there are hardly any areas of public transportation. There are just few schools that are centralized and many towns separated from one another. And there are fewer people, like 2/3 fewer people on the Cape during non-tourist season. So young people who have anxiety and
we have that problem here in the Catskill Mountains as well.
Yeah. So at any rate, I felt I needed to finish this book, not for myself, but for other people. And I was a teacher of literature. I felt that I could make it more easily into a novel if I developed a protagonist based on myself. And I could follow the principles of creative writing. I could have a build up to a climax, and I could have a denouement and consequences. I knew how to structure a novel. And so that's what I did. And I decided I could get to the essence of the truth without sticking to the facts of the truth. And so, yes, I was able to do it that way. But the point that I'd like to get at in elaborating on my past is that both my father and my mother catapulted me into being a social activist. I became a person who felt I could repair the world, first of all, because I felt as most young people do when their families have problems, they think it's their fault. We internalize the emotional problems. And so therefore I felt compelled to do something about it. I wanted to do something about the anxieties that my father felt living in a competitive world where he had to make it big. He was a kosher butcher, believe it or not.
Yes.
And he was a kosher butcher at a time when supermarkets were taking over the kosher meat business. And he felt highly stressed.
Yeah. Okay. May I interrupt for a brief moment? Do you have a headset that you can put on, Sharon? Because we're still getting we're still getting a bit of the feedback. Maybe if you sit back a little tiny bit from your, that may be helpful. I think that's going to help. Oh, there it is again. I believe, yes. Well, we're going to forge ahead and forge ahead with this.
Okay. At any rate, I wanted to work towards a kinder, gentler workplace for people. so that they weren't so stressed, at least men at that time. Most men were the breadwinners of families in the 40s when women were pushed back into the domestic sphere. I wanted to be able to create less stress
Yeah.
in the world, a bit of marketplace, a kinder marketplace.
I understand. I'm also interested in the theme of the secrets, the theme of the spiritual theme of secrets. And because this is also a theme in the book your present book, and the where the three women that you profile so beautifully, I wouldn't say keep the secret, but don't reveal their Jewishness, and the theme of your mother and your family not wanting to share this, and the time finally coming where you felt empowered and found your voice in service to the world by sharing your voice,
I think
by sharing your secret.
Yes, that's a very interesting parallelism that you're bringing, Sandra. I never actually thought of it this way, but I think it's very important that at the time, you see, people don't often think about this when they think about the time of World War II and the Nazi period. But there was in the United States a great deal of seeping anti-Semitism,
Yes.
which my parents were aware of. And being Jewish, of course, was part of the immigrant situation to the US. My parents lived in self-selecting Jewish neighborhoods, but nevertheless, they were aware that Father Corcoran on the radio was blaming the Jews for the war in Europe. And so being Jewish has always, to one degree or another, as a minority living in a majority culture, it's been a liability, or it can be a liability, until, some people assimilate it. But as I became active in the women's movement, mainly to try to save women like my mother from abuse and second-class status as citizens, I became aware that many of those second-wave feminists were in fact Jewish, but they were not putting in the foreground their Jewishness. Mainly because, when you think of Gloria Steinem, who created Ms. Magazine, when you think of Bella Abzug, who's such a leader in New York politics, when you think of Judy Chicago, the great artist, when you think of Susan Weidman Schneider, who started Lillith magazine, all of the names that I rattle off, and there are many more, they were all secular Jews, but they were not putting out there in the public sphere their Jewishness, because just like two of the Holocaust survivors in my book, my recent book.
This is a great place we're going to hold, because we have to go to break. This is a perfect place to take a break. Keep that thought. The three women, we're going to talk about the three groundbreaking Jewish feminists that Dr. Sharon Leder has profiled in her fantastic book, when we come back on the Edge of Every Day. Stay tuned.
I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on TalkRadio.NYC every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.NYC. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc, now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Chipping around, kick my brain to the ground. These are the days it never rained, but it pours on the edge
of every day. And we are back with Sharon Leder, and we're going to pick it up where we left off. These powerful, well-known, culturally instrumental women that were making great strides, great changes in our social structure and fabric, that were not stepping forward with or coming out with their Jewishness. And so we move into this book, this incredible book. I'm not quite finished with it, Sharon. I'm 3/4 of the way through it. It's fantastic. You have profiled 3 women. Gerda Lerner. She's the co-creator of Women's History and Black Women's History. And she wrote Creation of Patriarchy, which I just bought, Sharon. It just arrived from Amazon. Susana Wald, surrealist artist, although she's also written. She's done so many things. And Ruth Messenger, NYC native, and currently the global ambassador for American Jewish Service, World Service. So why these 3 women? Did you know any of them? I think you knew Messenger. Why did you choose these 3 women? What was the spark to, well, you did speak a bit about the spark, but what made you want to write a book about it?
I needed to write the book because these women became known in their field and responded to crises around the world in ways that I could relate to. Mm. And yet they were responding out of these universal values that came from their Jewish upbringing. But for various reasons that were political and psychological at different moments in time, they didn't feel safe or appropriate to be putting their Jewishness in the public sphere. And so the 3 women had different points of emergence into the public world as Jews. And I related to that because it was my Jewishness that came from my activism. As a young girl, I was second seat to my brother who got his Hebrew education. It wasn't important for women in my family to get that education, so I felt left out. Likewise, these women had difficulties with the patriarchal aspects of Judaism. They wanted women to be in the forefront as well. And when Jewish women experienced the second wave women's movement, they started reshaping Judaism. And they started looking into the important roles of women. They looked into the goddess tradition on which the original Judaism and Hebrew nation succeeded. And they explored many of the figures and elevated women to positions of prominence so that the women rabbis that we know today come from the second wave women's movement when Jewish women bonded together and said, let's do the same thing. Let's reshape our lives according to the contributions that we really did make. And so Gerda Lerner was raised in an Orthodox tradition in Vienna, but when she was able, as a refugee, to emigrate to the United States. She felt that there was a need for her to hide her Jewishness as an emigre from Austria with a German passport. She was seen as an enemy alien just because she was German. Even though she was Jewish and a Jewish refugee, she did not feel safe being publicly Jewish after experiencing the Holocaust.
I'm sure.
Susana Wald as well did not feel safe. In fact, she took on many different covers over her Jewishness. First, she became Catholic. Then she became a surrealist, which some people think is just an art form, but it's not. It's really a way of life and a philosophy.
And what is that? What is that philosophy?
The philosophy is to understand that the world of the intellect and the world of our the rational world.
Indeed, the patriarchal world.
Yes. That was the world that created World War II and World War I. So isn't there something we're missing if we don't give freedom to the imagination and the subconscious? How can we liberate? How can we liberate ourselves to be full human beings? And some of Susana Wald's writings on surrealism remind us of the words of rabbis that say we need to recite blessings for all those wonderful things around us, like the sunshine, like our sense of taste, like our sense of wonder and amazement. And so often we see strange things put together in surrealist paintings that don't seem to belong, as you saw in some of Susana's paintings, an egg sitting in air on top of the table. That catches our attention. But essentially what surrealists are trying to do is to say, shake it up. Look at the real world and see how fantastic it really is.
Totally.
Don't give in to convention.
And so our third,
Ruth Messenger. Ruth Messenger was a politician. She was the only Jewish person and a woman to run for mayor of New York City against Rudy Giuliani in his second term. And she could not, living in the separation of church and state, be public as a Jewish person. But when she became the head or at the helm of American Jewish World Service, she felt so thrilled that she could put her public face forward as a Jew. And her motive in being Jewish and a humanitarian was to promote the universal values of Judaism. She was a follower of the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a teacher.
Wasn't her mother, didn't her mother work for him?
She did, at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And the mother took home work, edits that she needed to make, and she asked for Ruth to help her, work with these items. And Ruth learned all about Heschel's philosophy, which is bringing social justice Judaism to the world. And one of his hallmark quotes is, in a free society where terrible things happen, some of us are guilty, but all of us are responsible. And this is an adage that Ruth took greatly to heart and believed that whenever there is a problem around the world, American Jewish World Service wants to go where the need is the greatest. And so one of her first assignments was helping victims of climate crises. She visited El Salvador. She also wanted to say never again, not only to the Holocaust, but other genocides. She created the Save the Darfur campaign when in the Darfur region of Sudan, tribes were being discriminated against and genocides were being created. She was a universalistic Jew. And in fact, I was so motivated because I did, as a native New Yorker myself, I was aware of her political work, but I wanted to follow her as the head of American Jewish World Service. And I know that she helped me understand some crucial concepts in Judaism that have separated Jews from other peoples in the world. One is the concept of the chosen people, which often is interpreted as a superiority. But she had such a wonderful take on this concept, which was that our being chosen, what that means is that we are chosen to identify with other people who are targets of discrimination, and that we are obligated, according to Rabbi Heschel, we are all responsible. We are obligated to come forward to support others who are targets of discrimination, even if that makes us as Jews vulnerable ourselves. And so I think that I was motivated to write about these women because they made a difference in their fields. Now, Gerda Lerner is responsible for creating Women's History Month. We're celebrating that now.
Which we're in right now.
Yes.
As we discussed.
She created the field of women's history with, of course, the support of others, but she was the main mover and shaker. And the work that I became most familiar with when I was first teaching was Black women in white America. And she really proved to the field of history that there was a Black women's history.
Now, you used that book in your teaching, correct?
I did, yeah. I used that book when I was teaching mainly Black and Latinx adults who were workers in the field of health, and they needed to get bachelor's degrees in order to continue in their fields. And that book, Black Women in White America, empowered them. It made them feel like they were being recognized in their history. And their history goes back, way back, even into slavery times, when you have hidden works that couldn't be brought out into the open. So we get into secrets again. Some of this literature was secreted, and Gerda Lerner did the research to bring them forward and put them out in the public sphere. Yes. So I was motivated by all these women, and I felt their stories needed to be told.
And we need to go to break, so I'm going to close this section out with this notion of the empowerment of, it's understandable, the secret keeping, of course, for all of the potent reasons, but the spiritual understanding of unburdening these secrets, and that, and in Jungian terms, I think of it, of the shadow, the places, the secrets that we keep in the shadows that we don't want people to know, but Jung's understanding that it's the most potent place. Those things that we don't want to share, that we're afraid to reveal, are the source of our greatest strength.
You're so right.
And on that note, I like to be right, Sharon. On that note, we are going to take a break. And when we come back with Sharon, we're going to dive into some other creative writing that she has done, poetry, and talk quickly about her, potentially her dissertation and how that weaves in with poetry, and find out what she's doing next on The Edge of Every Day with Sharon Leder when we come back. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.NYC, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.NYC.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on TalkRadio.NYC, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Calling all pet lovers.
Pet Avengers, assemble!
On the Professionals and Animal Lovers show, we believe the bond between animal lovers is incredibly strong. It mirrors that bond between pets and their owners. Through this program, we come together to learn, educate, and advocate.
Join us live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Chipping around, kick my brain to the ground. These are the days it never rained, but it pours on the edge of every day.
And we are back with Dr. Sharon Leder. And so we're going to start this section off, your edge being, Sharon, your edge being feminism. Edges up with your Jewishness, which edges up with your lifelong desire to share your voice in the world. So your creative writing, do you feel that your creative writing has really empowered you more than your academic writing? And just briefly.
I do, because in the academic world, one needs to publish or perish. And so my field was literary criticism, women writers, and I pursued that. But the women's studies, which I was part of, required more of a deep dive into how were women overcoming their setbacks. And that needed to be accomplished with a mixture of biography as well as literary criticism. And so I needed to give the social historical conditions of the two women that I was writing about. Initially, I was writing about a 19th century woman poet who often is not known in the United States. Her name is Christina Rossetti.
Right. Okay. Hang on. I mean in your own writing, not about the writing of the two poets, your dissertation. We'll get to the dissertation, but I mean in your own writing.
In my own writing,
yeah,
there were anxieties and contradictions and unresolved angers that I needed to really work through. And I found that the best way to do that actually was through poetry at first. Fiction writing came later, but poetry was the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling.
Excellent. That's perfect. Let's dive in. Let's dive into your poem.
Okay.
That's a perfect intro.
Okay. This is in the context of being a child and witnessing one of the calamities when a dad is high on his substance and he's at home and mom is not around, and dad gets into a real big problem of being too dizzy to really take care of himself or his kids. So I am alone in our apartment with my younger brother, and I witnessed something that I shouldn't really have to see, and that is my dad having a terrible accident in the apartment. And he unfortunately loses the tip of his finger as I watch. And this poem is called A Simple Afternoon. And I attempt to put in poetry form what I'm going through. Mama told me to protect you. She left us with Daddy in the faultless front room. There was the friendly chair, the dining table, and the swinging door. The sun through the window, the TV on, your toy train running round and round its track. I had the sister's older eyes, the sassy mouth, the knotted fist with schoolyard bullies, the wiser foot on shortcuts home. But such a storm took Daddy's drugged brain, such a whirlwind of arms, toppled table, chair, and train. I was thrown, and the door blown. Not meant for kids to see, the unhinged door. Daddy's finger sliced and sore, while TV droned. Before our 4 forbidden eyes, the rush of blood.
Has your creative writing of your poetry and your novel, where you could tell your story through the eyes of fiction, do you feel that that's helped you through the years connect to forgiveness and compassion to your parents and the trauma that you went through as a young person that affected you for so long?
Well, yes, I'm glad you brought up that point, because the whole point is to be able to have compassion and love, which can come when you understand the conditions that other people are living through. That's
universalism.
Yes, yes. I mean, as a child, I was overwhelmed with anger at my dad.
Yeah.
Anger for not being there, for not loving us enough.
And your mom.
I didn't, yes, and
not standing up to it.
Unfortunately, here's a bit of truth telling, Sandra. You know, when my dad was suffering from his addiction and he many times was not home and there with the family, my mom was there and she was closest to us. And as young, ununderstanding kids, we took it out on Mom. She was there.
Of course.
Our anger spilled out on her and she didn't deserve it. Yeah. But that's part of the psychology, I think, of kids. At any rate, if I only wrote a memoir, I would be stuck on anger. Yeah. But fiction requires a distance. Fiction requires you to see the good and the bad.
Indeed,
in real life, I'm a victim, but I needed to develop the distance to be able to overcome that victimhood and say, my life can be different. Yes. And I wished my dad was living at a time where his life could have been different.
Amen to that. Oof. Well, that's beautiful. So before we close out, an hour is never enough time, Sharon. As we talked about many, many times while we were preparing for this, I want hours and hours with you. I want to make sure that I get in before I ask one and give you the final say. I want to make sure that I get in your website, Sharon Leder, LEDER.com. And on there, is there information where people can purchase your book, which I have sitting right here. And I'm going to put it up. Can people order that on your website? Where can people get that other than their local bookstore? Can they get it on Amazon as well? Or, for the
Amazon.
People who shouldn't be going to Amazon, but they still do.
Yeah, and Barnes & Noble as well.
Barnes & Noble. Excellent, excellent. So Well, my last question for you is, what's next? I know that you have a sequel coming up. Yes?
Yeah, I have.
Just to let you know, you just have a minute to tell us about this before we sign on out. So dive in.
Yeah, I want to do due diligence and justice to my mom. My life with my mom after my father's death from an overdose at age 42. We had a lot of time with my mom, and my rocky road with my mom got to a really good place. She was a wonderful, loving, and funny person, and I made amends with her, and I follow my own ability to have her feel good about the women's movement too. She trained me in her way to be a good wife. I never became a mother, but she would have liked that. But she saw value in the women's movement by our sharing afterwards. And so my sequel is called Repairing the Katzes. The Katz is the fictional name I gave my family. So we'll have a novel, hopefully, Repairing the Katzes, my attempt to make amends with my mom. And hopefully the research I've done in the goddess tradition will help me there.
I can't wait to speak with you about all of that, the goddess tradition. So when do you suspect this will be out?
Well, I would say, a year worth of writing.
Got it. Excellent. So those of you who are tuning in, you can expect the sequel to the fix, Repairing the Katzes, in about maybe a year and a half. Sharon, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on the show today.
Thank you.
From the moment that I spoke with you, I was really moved by your tender heart and your wisdom and your kindness and compassion, and you set the tone for everything that you want your readers to understand about universalism, about making a difference in these challenging times. So thank you for sharing yourself, your wisdom, your beauty, and your creativity today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
And I want to...
You bring it out. You bring it out.
Yay! That's my hope and my prayer. And I want to thank all of you who are listening in. Go to SharonLeder.com again, and you can go to sandrabargman.com to order The Edge of Every Day. Remember this, you are always at the edge of the miraculous. So until next week, take good care. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Under pressure.